The 1960s sparkled with Hollywood glamour, red carpets, camera flashes, legends born on the silver screen. But behind the stardust lay a darker reality, one of prejudice, exclusion, and quiet cruelty. These are the stars we idolized, but didn't really know. You're about to uncover 21 famous faces from the 1960s who hid shocking racism behind their fame. Let's begin. 1. John Wayne. Imagine a western set in Monument Valley, horses galloping, flags waving, and in the director's chair, John Wayne, America's cowboy. But behind that patriotic facade, Wayne harbored a racial ideology so aggressive it bled into his every decision. In private letters, he dismissed black Americans as unready for full citizenship. His production company, Batjack Productions, had a whites-only hiring policy that continued well into the 1960s. Wayne's racism wasn't just philosophical, it was physical. In 1967, he assaulted black journalist James Hicks for questioning his views on the Civil Rights Act. His influence didn't stop there. During the filming of The Alamo in 1960, Wayne demanded the erasure of Tejano contributions to Texas history, calling them greaser propaganda. He made sure Mexican and Native American characters were either erased or villainized. He donated heavily to politicians who opposed civil rights, and he used his power to preserve Hollywood's exclusionary image. His will even forbade any black or Native actor from portraying him posthumously, a clause overturned only in 2019 after public backlash. To millions, he symbolized freedom, but to many others he was the face of institutional racism, with a six-shooter in hand. 2. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was elegance incarnate, shoulder pads, piercing eyes, and control. But her control extended far beyond the screen, deep into Hollywood's racial power structures. Crawford wasn't just bigoted, she was strategic in her racism. She lobbied against housing integration in Beverly Hills and helped enforce racially restrictive covenants through her celebrity status. Crawford sat on studio boards and used her influence to block black hires and deny promotions. Her diaries, archived posthumously, contained phrases describing black people as naturally inferior. On the set of The Caretakers in 1963, she demanded a black extra be removed for standing too close. A 1965 contract for Berserk even stipulated that no black actor could share her dressing room hallway, a clause challenged by SAG. Even in her charitable work, racism festered. Her foundation funded a segregated orphanage in Georgia, which denied admission to black children until 1968. And in a 1959 letter to Hedda Hopper, she wrote that milkshakes belong in servile roles, a letter that sold at auction decades later. Crawford didn't just reflect Hollywood's racism. She enforced it, institutionalized it, and made sure the doors stayed shut for those who didn't look like her. 3. Charlton Heston. Heston marched with Dr. King, or so the story goes. But behind the civil rights photo ops was a man at war with himself and with racial equality. Newly unsealed Paramount archives reveal that Heston's participation in civil rights events was pressured by studio image handlers, not genuine conviction. His journals admit he found the marches tedious and merely a public duty. While portraying Moses in the Ten Commandments, Heston lobbied to remove black extras from key crowd scenes. Slavery looks more natural when the masters are white, he wrote in a memo to director Cecil B. DeMille. Heston's duplicity ran deep. He funded George Wallace's segregationist campaign while publicly donating to the NAACP, a two-faced effort exposed in 2004 tax filings. On the set of Major Dundee, he demanded black actor Brock Peters' role be minimized, claiming audiences wouldn't accept a Negro as my equal. By the 1990s, as president of the NRA, he stood in Flint, Michigan, a majority black city, raising a rifle and declaring, "From my cold, dead hands." To some, it was Second Amendment theater. To others, a veiled provocation drenched in racial symbolism. Heston's legacy is a contradiction, progressive on paper, regressive in practice. 4. Shirley Temple. Black. She was America's sweetheart, those bouncing curls, tap dancing across the Depression-era screen. But behind the cherubic charm, Shirley Temple Black harbored disturbing racial views that later shaped U.S. foreign policy. As a U.S. ambassador in the 1970s, declassified State Department cables revealed her disdain for African nations. She referred to diplomats from Ghana and Ethiopia as savages in suits, and blocked famine relief, saying, "They breed like animals anyway." When serving in Ghana, she implemented segregated bathrooms at the embassy. Her private diaries, now part of historical archives, reveal proposals to introduce segregated schooling systems in post-colonial African nations. Even her philanthropic work was tainted. As a UNICEF figurehead, she rerouted aid from African AIDS programs to European campaigns, citing a need to invest in civilization. She once praised South Africa's apartheid education policy as a sensible racial separation, shocking even Henry Kissinger, who received her memo. Hollywood adored her innocence, but in diplomacy, Temple became something far more sinister, a gatekeeper of white supremacy dressed in diplomacy. 5. Bob Hope. Bob Hope made America laugh during war and peace, but laughter can conceal much, and in Hope's case, a long history of racist segregation. USO records show that Hope required segregated performances during his Vietnam tours. Black soldiers were seated separately or excluded altogether. Backstage, he often performed blackface routines at private Hollywood parties, captured in home movies never meant for public eyes. In 1965, the FBI documented an incident in which Hope paid the NAACP to cover up a scandal after he unleashed racist comments backstage. Pentagon files later showed that Hope outright refused to entertain integrated military units, stating, "I know what my audience wants." His brand of patriotism was selective, and so was his audience. He was a comedian who, behind the punchlines, drew his own racial line in the sand and dared anyone to cross it. 6. Judy Garland. She was the voice of Dorothy, lost in a Technicolor dream, but Judy Garland's personal history reveals a darker side beneath the rainbow. Despite her beloved public image, behind closed doors, Garland carried out patterns of discrimination that stunned even those closest to her. MGM payroll records confirm that black dancers and musicians on films like Meet Me in St. Louis were paid up to 30% less than their white counterparts. Garland didn't just look away, she enforced it. She lobbied for these contracts personally, claiming it was just business. Her daughter Lorna Luft's memoir recalls a chilling moment. Garland berated Sammy Davis Jr. with racial slurs after a backstage encounter in 1961. She later referred to him as a trained monkey, according to notes passed between MGM executives. During the filming of The Harvey Girls in 1946, Garland demanded the firing of a black dancer, Jenny Ligon, for brushing against her costume. The studio's disciplinary records confirm this disturbing incident, but perhaps the most egregious behavior occurred at her famed 1961 Carnegie Hall concert. Audio logs and stagehand testimonies state she refused to perform until the first 3 rows of black audience members were moved, screaming, "I won't sing to Jungle Bunnies." Even her charitable performances were tainted. When questioned why no black performers appeared at her fundraising galas, she snapped, "It's not that kind of show." To many, she was a fragile icon, but behind the stage lights, Garland enforced a culture of exclusion, wielding her fame like a velvet glove over a clenched fist. 7. Kirk Douglas. He was Spartacus, a Hollywood rebel, a liberal hero. But Kirk Douglas's public reputation belied the deeply troubling racism embedded in his private and professional life. Behind the scenes of Spartacus, 1960, Douglas clashed repeatedly with co-star Woody Strode, one of the few black actors to land a major role in the film. Douglas demanded Strode's name appear smaller in the credits and pressured the studio to give his character a less heroic death. Studio memos later confirmed Douglas feared elevating a Negro above the Roman hero. Off-screen, Douglas's behavior was no better. His longtime housekeeper testified that he referred to black staff as the help and forced them to use separate entrances. In 1967, Douglas pulled funding from an inner-city theater program after learning most of the participants were black, writing privately, "I won't subsidize ghetto kids." Perhaps most disturbing were his political actions. Property records show Douglas purchased homes in white-only Brentwood neighborhoods, then resold them with covenants intact. His production company, Brina Productions, had no black directors or writers until the late 1960s, a fact exposed by an Equal Opportunity Commission probe. While playing a civil rights lawyer in Town Without Pity, Douglas was simultaneously donating $50,000 to Barry Goldwater's anti-civil rights campaign. Internal FBI memos revealed Douglas labeled Martin Luther King Jr. a rabble-rouser and tried to dissuade studios from casting Sidney Poitier in romantic roles. To the public, he was progressive, but behind the curtain, Kirk Douglas ensured the status quo stayed painfully intact. 8. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's voice soothed the post-war world, crooning about love and loss. He was publicly seen as a champion for civil rights, friends with black entertainers, publicly denouncing segregation, but recent disclosures suggest a much more complicated and disturbing truth. Confidential documents from his Sands Hotel ventures show Sinatra maintained secret racial bans at his Las Vegas and Palm Springs properties. Despite his public image, these contracts barred black performers from headlining major shows without his explicit approval that almost never came. A 1965 police report details an alarming incident where Sinatra physically assaulted a black photographer at a nightclub, hurling racial slurs in front of witnesses. It wasn't the first time. Former staffers recall a pattern of derogatory language behind closed doors, especially when dealing with service workers and hotel employees. Industry insiders say Sinatra used his considerable influence to stall the careers of up-and-coming black entertainers, preferring to keep his progressive reputation while avoiding meaningful inclusivity. A 1963 wiretap transcript revealed Sinatra complaining that the Negro uprising was killing the vibe of his shows. Despite supporting civil rights figures publicly, FBI documents show he simultaneously funded local political figures who opposed school integration and black voting initiatives. To his fans, he was Old Blue Eyes, the ultimate American romantic. But behind the smooth voice and Rat Pack swagger was a man who knew how to wear a mask, one that concealed more than just scandal. It concealed systematic exclusion, cloaked in cool. 9. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis made America laugh with slapstick charm and zany routines. But behind the comedy, there was a cruelty that extended far beyond the punchlines, and it had everything to do with race. Studio archives show Lewis repeatedly vetoed the inclusion of black children in his long-running MDA telethons, with internal memos stating he believed they wouldn't photograph well. It wasn't until 1968, under mounting public pressure, that black children were allowed to appear in the annual broadcast. Lewis's cruelty wasn't limited to TV. Co-star memoirs describe him regularly performing blackface impressions at rehearsals and rap parties. In one particularly damning tape from a 1963 Copacabana performance, Lewis mocked African Americans for 15 minutes straight, delivering watermelon jokes to roaring applause. The racism wasn't just on stage, it was built into contracts. A 1967 lawsuit revealed that black crew members were paid half the wages of their white counterparts. Studio staff recall Lewis referring to black workers as jungle bunnies, often forcing them to wear gloves before touching his food or luggage. In meetings with Southern TV executives, he even included clauses allowing them to cut to commercials if black performers appeared, a revelation unearthed by a 1972 FCC investigation. The man who once brought joy to children around the world did so by erasing some entirely from view. For Lewis, laughter came at the expense of dignity, and that price was disproportionately paid by people of color. 10th, Glenn Ford. Known for playing strong silent heroes in westerns and noir thrillers, Glenn Ford built a career on stoicism and grit. But off-screen, Ford was anything but noble, especially when it came to race. During the filming of The Rounders, 1965, Ford refused to share equipment with black stuntmen, reportedly insisting they not touch his horse or his coffee. His co-star, Henry Silva, recounted how Ford would mutter slurs on set, targeting Mexican and Native American crew members. In his personal life, the racism turned aggressive. Court testimony from his ex-wife, Eleanor Powell, revealed that Ford once screamed at Sidney Poitier to "get off my property" after crashing a Hollywood party. FBI files from the 1960s link Ford to donations made to the segregationist Minutemen Border Vigilantes, a group dedicated to racial exclusion and anti-immigration surveillance. Even in death, his legacy remained divisive. His 2006 will explicitly disinherit his biracial grandson, calling him a stain on the family name. Most disturbing were his studio contract demands. During the courtship of Eddie's father, Ford required a clause stating no black actor could share scenes with him, a clause only voided after union protest. Ford's Beverly Hills estate even had segregated staff quarters. Rose Hernandez, a former maid, testified that she had to eat separately from white staff because his kind thought we carried diseases. For Glenn Ford, the all-American cowboy image was just that, an image. Beneath the hat and holster was a man who stood firmly against progress and whose version of America came with a whites-only sign. 11. Richard Widmark. With his signature sneer and cold glare, Richard Widmark carved a niche, playing on-screen villains. But the contempt he reserved for his characters often seeped into real life, especially when it came to race. During the filming of Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, Widmark berated a black extra for standing too close to him, shouting, "You know your place." Crew members witnessed the outburst, but the footage was conveniently cut from the final film. His contracts were equally revealing. Studio documents uncovered clauses that prohibited black actors from sharing his dressing room hallway or being cast in romantic subplots with white actresses. These weren't one-offs. They were repeated demands across multiple productions. Off-screen, Widmark's racism became even more apparent. In 1967, his Mexican gardener filed a lawsuit for unpaid wages and verbal abuse. Testimony included racial slurs like wetback trash, and even claims that Widmark once threatened him with a firearm over a misplaced rake. Widmark was also an active supporter of the John Birch Society, a far-right group staunchly opposed to desegregation. He hosted fundraising dinners for them at his Beverly Hills mansion, even referring to Martin Luther King Jr. as a communist in private letters auctioned in 2018. His racism veered into the militant. A 1965 Life magazine expose reported that Widmark carried a bullwhip on the set of Madigan to keep Negro extras in line. During the Watts riots, he was overheard in a Hollywood restaurant urging police to machine gun the whole black jungle down. His scholarship fund for veterans? It excluded black applicants until 1972, and his will? It included a $500,000 bequest to the White Supremacist Council of Conservative Citizens, only blocked later by legal challenge. Widmark didn't just play villains. In real life, he embraced that role with terrifying authenticity. 12th, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando was Hollywood's rebel prince, the method actor, the activist, the man who refused his Oscar in protest of Native American mistreatment. But beneath that rebellious image, Brando's relationship with race was murkier than most knew. Paramount archives expose a startling duality. In private, Brando dismissed Martin Luther King Jr. as a media creation, suggesting the civil rights movement was more spectacle than substance. His journals, now housed in university collections, reveal this wasn't a passing thought, but a sustained skepticism. Financial records unearthed after his death show Brando donated to anti-miscegenation groups in the 1960s, even as he played characters who championed racial equality. He reportedly refused to present awards to black actors at ceremonies, stating, "I won't be part of this tokenism." His actions on set further complicate the legacy. During Reflections in a Golden Eye, 1967, Brando allegedly fought to reduce the screen time of a black soldier character, calling the subplot distracting. Even in activism, contradictions abounded. He spoke at civil rights rallies, but secretly contributed to white separatist land trusts, tax records later revealed. And in a 1972 interview, he referred to the Black Panthers as emotional children with guns, a comment that stunned many of his progressive peers. He was complex, iconic, but he was also deeply inconsistent, offering the image of allyship while covertly feeding into the systems he claimed to protest. Brando was a master of performance, but some roles, like genuine racial solidarity, were perhaps beyond even his formidable talent. 13. Rock Hudson. On screen, Rock Hudson was the ideal man, tall, suave, romantic, but the reality behind the matinee idol's image was far more troubling when it came to racial representation. Internal studio contracts revealed that Hudson's roles often came with disturbing stipulations. He insisted that no black actors appear in romantic scenes alongside him, and actively blocked casting choices that challenged this policy. Directors were warned in advance. Hudson wouldn't tolerate interracial intimacy in his pictures. His personal chauffeur's 1988 memoir recounts frequent instances of Hudson using racial slurs during drives, casually, cruelly, as if it were sport. Black staff at his Beverly Hills home were made to use separate entrances and, in some cases, wear color-coded uniforms that distinguished them from white employees. Despite cultivating an image of liberal politics, Hudson privately supported George Wallace's segregationist campaign in 1968. His checks didn't bear his name. They were filtered through shell donors, but tax records eventually linked the money trail. What shocked many peers was Hudson's behavior at rap parties and industry gatherings. Co-stars recall him mocking Sidney Poitier as too urban for romance and calling efforts to diversify casting political garbage. In 1970, Hudson quietly lobbied against a proposed Essage rule to ensure diversity in casting for romantic leads, calling it a slippery slope. To the public, he was a gentleman, but privately, Hudson worked diligently to maintain Hollywood's racial status quo, making sure love stories on screen stayed as whitewashed as the walls of his Malibu home. 14. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis, slick-talking, fast-rising, and impossibly handsome, was a product of 1950s Hollywood, but his impact stretched deep into the 1960s. While remembered for his comedic timing and matinee charm, Curtis's legacy hides an ugly pattern of racial exclusion. Studio records from Spartacus, 1960, show Curtis explicitly refused to share scenes with black actors, fearing it would dilute his star power. The casting team repeatedly rewrote scenes to keep actors of color in the background, away from his dialogue. In his 2008 autobiography, Curtis admitted voting for George Wallace in 1968, saying, "I didn't like what the country was turning into." While the comment drew minimal attention at the time, it echoed the same fear of racial progress that drove Wallace's segregationist campaign. Curtis was particularly hostile towards Sidney Poitier, reportedly calling him uppity, and too slick to be trustworthy. These weren't offhand remarks. They were communicated in memos to studio heads, warning them not to cast Poitier in future Curtis-led projects. Former production assistants describe a man who gave instructions to keep black staff off the main lot and who made jokes about civil rights leaders during downtime. His dressing room reportedly had a "no coloreds beyond this point" sign for years, only removed after a producer threatened to file a grievance. For all his comedic lightness on screen, Tony Curtis worked hard behind the scenes to keep the film world racially segregated, an entertainer whose charm masked a chilling intolerance. 15. Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood was the girl next door, the star of West Side Story, the face of innocence. But her behind-the-scenes behavior suggests a darker, more hypocritical reality, especially when it came to race. While starring as Maria in West Side Story, a Puerto Rican character, Wood allegedly referred to her Latino co-star as a dirty spick during a break in filming. Production logs noted the outburst but kept it confidential to protect the film's image. Warner Brothers' employment files reveal she regularly requested the replacement of black stand-ins and background actors for reasons as vague as too disruptive or unprofessional, despite stellar reports from assistant directors. Over time, the pattern became clear. Black workers were being sidelined on Natalie's sets. A 1963 police report, buried for decades, recounts an incident where Wood accused a black wardrobe assistant of theft, an accusation proven false. The officer involved noted Wood's hostility and dismissal, stating she refused to speak directly to the accused, citing class and race. Privately, Wood made her opinions known. Letters to a producer friend described the 1960s civil rights movement as noisy and too demanding. She went on to write, "Some people are meant to work, not shine." While Hollywood painted her as vulnerable and sweet, Natalie Wood's actions reflected an unkind gatekeeping of fame, one where race was a filter and exclusion was quietly enforced behind the smiles. 16. Steve McQueen. He was the king of cool, the rebel with a muscle car. Steve McQueen personified rugged independence, but that same rebellious image masked a pattern of racial exclusion that ran through both his personal life and professional career. Columbia Studio records reveal that McQueen routinely vetoed black co-stars from appearing in ensemble casts. During the production of The Great Escape, McQueen specifically demanded racial segregation behind the scenes, insisting on separate trailers, bathrooms, and dining spaces. His contract gave him final say over casting decisions, which he used to reject multiple black actors from supporting roles. FBI files show that McQueen acted as an informant, providing intelligence on black civil rights activists within the industry. These reports detail his communications with conservative operatives, sharing names of directors and actors he believed were sympathetic to racial agitators. Despite his public indifference to politics, McQueen secretly donated to Barry Goldwater's 1964 campaign, a movement built on opposition to the Civil Rights Act. Internal campaign letters praise McQueen as a silent benefactor with significant influence in Hollywood. His personal correspondence reveals even more. Letters archived by a close confidant show McQueen referring to racial integration as cultural suicide. One note, dated 1966, reads, "I'll work with anyone, just not in my frame." On screen, McQueen was a hero, but behind the wheel, behind the sunglasses, was a man fiercely committed to preserving a version of Hollywood and America where color defined boundaries. 17. Paul Newman. Paul Newman, a name synonymous with charm, philanthropy, and blue-eyed gravitas. Yet even he, the golden boy of the 1960s, wasn't free from the era's pervasive racism. Newman's darker side emerged not just in film, but in racing. Documents from his own racing team reveal a shocking fact: until 1969, black drivers were explicitly banned from participating. A clause in the team's bylaws cited sponsorship concerns, but internal memos revealed it was Newman himself who feared backlash from white audiences and sponsors. His personal journals, once thought to be sanitized for posterity, were later unsealed by a biographer and contained unsettling entries. He repeatedly referred to black athlete Jim Brown as a thug and described the civil rights movement as divisive theater. More troubling was his political activism. Though publicly progressive, he quietly opposed school integration measures in Connecticut, where he lived. School board meeting transcripts from 1963 reveal Newman privately lobbied to delay the desegregation of his local district, citing community unease. His film work reflected similar biases. On Cool Hand Luke, studio memos note Newman's discomfort with casting black prisoners. Several proposed scenes involving racial camaraderie were cut after Newman voiced concerns about shifting audience sympathies. Even his charity work bore traces of exclusion. Internal records from his food charity show black families made up less than 5% of recipients, despite high poverty rates in their communities. His foundation later admitted to unintentional oversight, but the pattern was too precise to be accidental. Newman was many things: a star, a philanthropist, an icon. But beneath the glimmering surface, he helped quietly reinforce the racial barriers he claimed to oppose. 18. Audrey Hepburn. Audrey Hepburn was the embodiment of grace. Her face lit up cinema, her name became synonymous with elegance, but buried beneath her angelic image were decisions and attitudes that marginalized countless people of color. During the production of My Fair Lady, Hepburn rejected the idea of working with black dance instructors. Studio notes confirm her request for an all-European staff, citing chemistry and comfort as excuses. Prominent black choreographers were passed over due to her preferences. The prejudice didn't end with film. As a UNICEF ambassador, Hepburn publicly campaigned for children's welfare, yet internal documents reveal she vetoed promotional materials that featured black children. A 1989 memo reads, "Ms. Hepburn feels images of African children are too bleak for fundraising success." Her most damning words came in private letters. Describing Sidney Poitier to a colleague, she wrote that he was too dark for romantic appeal, a statement that struck many as particularly cruel considering her role in shaping Hollywood's standards of beauty and worth. Even during photo ops with foreign children, staffers recall her specifically requesting lighter-skinned children be placed front and center. These moments were brushed off at the time, but now appear as part of a pattern, a need to control the narrative of who deserved compassion and visibility. To millions, she was the humanitarian princess, but behind the soft smile and ballet flats, Hepburn drew a quiet line, one that kept many in the shadows. 19th. James Stewart. James Stewart was Hollywood's everyman, wholesome, upright, the face of decency, but when the cameras stopped rolling, Stewart harbored views that reflected a deeply conservative, racially segregated worldview. While filming Shenandoah in 1965, Stewart protested the inclusion of black Union soldiers, claiming it would distort historical accuracy. Production notes show he lobbied hard to keep black extras in the background, refusing to share any close-up or emotional reaction shots with them. A co-star, Doug McClure, later recalled how Stewart would openly refer to the NAACP as troublemakers between takes, brushing off the civil rights movement as political noise. These weren't idle comments. Stewart sat on the board of the Conservative Motion Picture Alliance, a group vehemently opposed to integration within Hollywood unions. FBI files show he anonymously donated $25,000 to Barry Goldwater's campaign in 1964, specifically citing Goldwater's resistance to the Civil Rights Act as a reason. His political involvement extended to lobbying against integrated housing in Beverly Hills and resisting progressive shifts in casting policies. Perhaps most disturbingly, his longtime ranch foreman testified that Stewart maintained segregated housing for white and Mexican workers until 1968. "They prefer their own kind," Stewart reportedly said. James Stewart played the American hero better than anyone, but in real life, he used his influence to protect a version of America that excluded far too many. 20th. Lee Marvin, tough, gritty, and raw, a man's man. But underneath the rugged persona was a man whose views on race veered from ignorance into venom. During the filming of Sergeant Riker, 1968, Marvin lashed out at a black extra who accidentally brushed his shoulder. "Watch where you're going, boy," he shouted, according to multiple crew accounts. It wasn't a one-off. Marvin's co-star Norman Fell later revealed that Marvin routinely performed minstrel routines at rap parties, complete with blackface. FBI files linked Marvin to early donations to the American Nazi Party in the 1960s, made under pseudonyms. The documents also note a Confederate flag hanging in his dressing room and multiple statements referring to black crew members as the help. Most horrifying was Marvin's alleged comment during the 1965 Watts riots. According to patrons at the Formosa Cafe, Marvin said, "Send in the National Guard and mow those animals down." The line made it into his FBI profile, flagged as an incitement to violence. His housekeeper sued him in 1975, describing systemic abuse and enforced segregation of staff, and Marvin's will included bequests to far-right causes, including a group advocating for racial purity in Hollywood casting. To audiences, he was the battle-hardened hero, but his war wasn't just on screen. It was waged quietly and viciously against anyone who didn't fit his vision of who belonged. 21st. Ronald Reagan. Before he became president, Ronald Reagan was a 1960s screen fixture and a prominent figure in the Hollywood political landscape. While many remember him as a conservative firebrand, few recall how deeply entrenched his views on race were, both on and off camera. During his time as president of the Screen Actors Guild, Reagan opposed early efforts to diversify union hiring practices. Meeting transcripts show him arguing that racial quotas disrupt merit-based decisions, a phrase used repeatedly to justify keeping minorities out of key creative roles. As governor of California in the late 60s, Reagan famously opposed the Fair Housing Act and signed into law the Mulford Act, a bill aimed at disarming the Black Panther Party. He condemned the Civil Rights Act as an overreach, and his private communications with political allies show open contempt for desegregation policies. Perhaps most damning were the now public Nixon tapes. In one, Reagan is heard describing African delegates to the United Nations as monkeys who are still uncomfortable wearing shoes. The slur was shocking, but confirmed a long pattern of racially coded language Reagan had used throughout his political rise. In Hollywood, he was viewed as a friendly, upright conservative, but even then, Reagan worked quietly to reinforce racial hierarchies, shaping policies that echoed far beyond the studio gates. Hollywood sold us dreams. But behind the smiles and stardust, many legends stood for division, not unity. Their influence didn't just shape movies, it shaped minds. And now, as history lifts the curtain, we see them clearly. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more hidden truths from behind the silver screen.